So hello, my friends. It's Bryan here. Welcome to the School for Good Living podcast. This is my first solo episode. If you've listened to any of my shows before, probably it was an interview because to this point, that's the only thing I've released. That's actually not true. I released one episode that was talking about something else, but nevertheless. So what are we doing here? Well, one thing I'm doing is I'm recording this episode with the hope that I build a relationship with you. I might not know you. I might have met you before. You might be my best friend. When I'm sitting in this sound booth, I have no idea where this goes, who receives it, what impact it might have. In that way, it's a little bit like throwing a message in a bottle, like out into the ocean, which I did once when I was a kid and I had the chance to visit Australia. And I was hoping I would get a pen pal, but I never did. Anyway, where am I going with this? Well, today I want to build this relationship a little further with you by sharing, in case you care and in case it's interesting and useful for you, a little bit about me, Bryan Miller, a little bit about this School for Good Living, what it is, why it exists, what it could do for you. So with that, I want to start with this idea that is something my mentor, Marshall Goldsmith, who's considered the number one leadership thinker in the world by many people, one of the world's, if not the world's top CEO coach, that he tells to people who are in this world of coaching or teaching, training, facilitating, consulting. His advice is build a brand. But beyond build a brand, he encourages people to complete the sentence. I am the world's leading expert in blank. And I got to admit, when I was confronted with that question, with that opportunity to fill in that blank, that felt pretty challenging. Because in that moment, anything that I might fill in would feel like, to me, it felt like a lie. And so I've thought on that for a period of years. And when I had the chance to interview Marshall just a week ago, it was actually this week, I asked him about that again. And I said, well, Marshall, it seems pretty easy for you to say you're at the top of your field. If you say that, you have credibility, you've got many, many happy clients to point to. You've sold 2.5 million copies of your book. What do you say to people who aren't at that level? Maybe people who are starting out, people who don't know. And I love what he said when he said, pick a path. Well, just pick a path and follow that. Or just say, I will be, and even that can be confronting. I will be the world's leading expert on X. And as I've looked at that for myself, I've wondered, what if I was the world's leading expert on what it means to live a good life? That's pretty ambiguous, admittedly, but we've done enough research as a society now, and we've lived enough, most of us, to know generally like what works and what doesn't. We know, quitting smoking. Hard to think we ever didn't know that wasn't good for us. Things like being active, having relationships, getting sleep, these kinds of things, they're pretty obvious. And with many of them, there's this knowing doing gap. But what I want to share with you a little bit is part of what I said to Marshall is, and one of the things Marshall says is, if you're not the world's leading expert on something, why are you speaking? I was like, whoa, that's a pretty bold question, Like, why would people want to listen to you if you're not the top dog, so to speak? And I thought, that's an interesting question. Why are you speaking if you're not the world's leading expert on something? And what I thought about with that, and I said to Marshall, I said, well, what if the reason you're speaking is to figure out your voice? What if the reason you're speaking is to find what is your message? What if the reason you're speaking is to begin to understand better for yourself, who is it that you want to speak to? Maybe what you would even consider your tribe. How do you find your soul tribe? And if you wait, you go into your cave and you work in secrecy until the one day you've got all your content figured out and all your plans and all this and come out with this brilliant scheme. I don't think that's reasonable. And it reminds me of that saying that's attributed to Joseph Campbell about life as a guy learning to play a violin in public, learning the instrument and the music at the same time. And it can feel a bit like that at times, especially if your aspiration is to serve others by sharing what you know and what your experience is. So that's what I want to talk about today, and specifically the School for Good Living. This thing that I've created, man, it's been 5 years. If I can believe that, it's been 5 years that I've been working to figure out for myself, who is it that I want to serve? What is it that they want or need? Why would they care and listen to me? And so with that, I thought I might just give you a little bit of background that as I've gone around these thoughts again and again in my own mind and with my little creative team, I'm fortunate to have a small team of highly talented, dedicated people that I'm able to bounce ideas off and who are able to help me when we get what we think is worth pursuing to wrestle it into reality. And over the years, I've used a number of different things that I thought, well, maybe that's the idea. Maybe that's the core of what this work is about. And for me personally, this has been a journey of, living a life that felt really empty or meaningless for a lot of years. In fact, sometimes I wonder that any of us make it to adulthood, given, the dangers of growing up, diseases, accidents, crime, that kind of thing. But, even when we get a little older and we see this in, social science and our own experience shows us that so many people are finding ways to end their lives prematurely, whether it's outright through suicide or whether it's through, behavioral and lifestyle things, poor diet, sedentary lifestyles, this kind of thing. So it's amazing. It's amazing to me that I've made it here into my 40s. And I'm actually really grateful that I have. But as I lived forward and emerged from what for me was a very long and looking back, what appears like a long and kind of lonely life of difficulty and meaninglessness, I knew that I didn't want to live that life anymore. I didn't know what I wanted in the future exactly. And I know many people seem to be in this situation. They're very clear. They don't want what they're currently living, but they're not able to articulate exactly what it is they do want. But I knew I wanted some version of doing work I enjoy, serving people I love, working with people I love, work that I feel matters, and getting paid for it, quite honestly. Knowing that I'm delivering value, having that reciprocated, by people signing up for my coaching or buying my books or my programs or whatever I do. So for me, there were these different elements to the work that I knew I wanted. And I knew that if I was going to do that, I didn't want to do it alone. I wanted to do it with a team and I wanted to do it with others. So as I looked at how I could create that, I really asked myself a few questions that were pivotal for me in my journey. And I wonder if in your journey, if you haven't already discovered a specific question, like a single question that you keep coming back to. And although the question never changes, you get a new answer, a new insight when you ask yourself that question with authenticity, with intention. And for me, the first question that started being very powerful in the creation of the School for Good Living was this idea. For a long time, I've been asking, why am I so blessed? I'm very, very fortunate to be part of a very successful business-owning family. My parents started this thing, the Larry H. Miller Group, that owns, most conspicuously the Utah Jazz, but many car dealerships and finance and real estate and other entertainment and, a lot of properties based here in Utah, but really we do business across the country in some form or fashion. And for a lot of years, rather than just enjoying those blessings, I felt guilty for them, knowing I hadn't done the work to earn them. I hadn't taken the risks and made the sacrifices. And I would ask myself, why am I so blessed? Especially knowing there's so many people in the world who are much less fortunate than me, whether, it's people in the developing world that don't have access to clean water, that don't have something as basic as a toilet, people who are in conflict zones or don't have education. I mean, there's so much that people don't have. I remember learning that many women in Africa will spend their days like collecting firewood and gathering water. I mean, like if that's your life, or children who die of diarrhea, they literally die of diarrhea. Like if they had Pedialyte or Gatorade, they might live, It's really amazing that's happening in the same world we're in. If you're listening to this, you've probably got an iPhone or something that runs Android. You're probably in a car or in a home, things that are easy to take for granted. In fact, I heard it said once that there are people praying now for things you take for granted. And I thought, oh my goodness, I think that's literally true. But whether it's in the developing world or in the developed world here, where we have different set of challenges, anxiety, depression, addiction, loneliness, sense of meaninglessness, these kinds of things. So for me, when I quit asking, why am I so blessed? Especially when there's so many that are not as blessed as me. And I started instead asking, what do I do with my blessings? How do I share my blessings with others in ways? How do I share what I have, know, and love with others? And that question, shifting from a why to a what, for me was very pivotal. And I sometimes think maybe I will do a TED Talk as a kind of a counterpoint. If you're an English major or a student of poetry, you might know back in the day, people would write odes. It was almost like rap battles. Somebody would write an ode and somebody would write a response and so forth. And for me, maybe this would be the response to Simon Sinek's start with why. Maybe it's start with what. And I often say that what do you want is life's operative question, and just getting clear. What do I want? Man, this can be so hard to know the answer to that question with all the other voices in our mind, from our parents, from our teachers, from, maybe a religious upbringing or a peer group or whatever. And so when I shifted that, what can I do to share what I have, love, and know with others in ways that bless their lives? That opened a door. To me, that was an empowering question. Why was an endless regression that, if there was a bottom, I think it probably was total despair. But, so that shifted. And then as I started to answer that question and along the lines of doing work I love with and for people I love, that I enjoy and experience as meaningful and getting paid for the rest of my life. And then I said, well, how can I do that? And, I could do that in a lot of ways. But I thought I want to create a company, and I want to create a nonprofit. And I've done both the School for Good Living and the Foundation for Good Living. At a high level, they both have essentially the same mission, which is to help make the world work for everyone, whatever that means. And the question specifically that I'm really exploring right now at the School for Good Living is, what does it mean to live a good life, and how can we do it? What does that even mean? And not that there's one prescriptive answer that we'll find and it's boom, done. Good thing I came along and wrote that book. Now we can put that question to rest, right? I don't think it's one of those. Instead, I think it's a very individual pursuit. It's up to each of us to find what makes life meaningful. What is it that brings us alive? What is it that, contributes to our sense of well-being and to those we love? And I know that's a very personal thing. And I love the way one of my podcast guests phrased this, James Wallman, who wrote Time and How to Spend It. And he talks about this idea that, yes, it's true, you are a unique snowflake, and you're snow. We're all unique, we're all individuals, so we are very different in some really deep ways, but at the same time, we're all the same in some very fundamental ways as well. So as I started to really explore this question, what does it mean to live a good life and how can we do it? These are some of the ideas that over the years with my creative team, we've explored, and some of the terms. So this idea of life's best practices. If there are a set of practices that make life work, what are they? Happiness, meaning, and contribution. To me right now, what I'm really exploring is what it means to live a good life is a life of happiness, meaning, and contribution. This idea of cultivating greater levels of power, productivity, and peace. And this idea that every one of us possesses genius. Every one of us has genius on par with anybody you could ever think of to call a genius, whether it's Oprah Winfrey or Michael Jackson or Einstein, Buckminster Fuller. I choose to believe that we all have that capability. These aren't rare breeds they are rare, but they're not totally unique in a way that we're separate from them. This idea of productivity and the idea that every one of us is capable of doing great work as great and meaningful as anybody who's ever lived. And then the last part about peace is how do we, beyond the accomplishment, beyond the acquisition, find the lasting peace and satisfaction that I believe is possible for every one of us. How can we have both, the accomplishment and the sense of fulfillment? Living a life that matters, making the difference you were born to make, making your life a masterpiece, a world that works for everyone, a life that works for you. This idea of a coach for everyone and everyone a coach. if you listen to me for very long at all, you'll hear me talk a lot about coaching. I love coaching. I think it's this very, very beautiful skill that's available to all of us. That part of what I love about it is it's future focused. It's not based in rehashing the past, trying to correct something that ultimately we can't go back. At least I haven't figured out how. It's collaborative. It's client-led. It's creative. It honors that unique individuality and intelligence in every one of us. And then these 3 ideas that if you subscribe to my weekly email right now, I share 3 things that I'm finding interesting and useful as I go through life. And I'm sharing 3 things specifically to help coaches. But I think they can be useful to anybody, whether you're a leader, whether you're a parent, just being a friend, a human being. And these 3 things are, again, how to live a good life. So I'm writing 100 words a week on something that might help you live a good life. 100 words on be a great coach, and 100 words on earn recognition and money. So, if that's something that appeals to you, if you're on this journey with me of figuring out what does it mean to live a life of happiness, meaning, and contribution, and how can I do it? And honestly, how can I get paid for it, or at least get compensated, even if it's not financially? How can I, build a bigger group of friends? How can I learn more? How can I have a greater sense of contribution by giving more? I mean, these are all ways that we can earn, compensation. Currency comes in many forms. And this other idea, something I'm calling the elegant equation, this idea, and it's really based on Maslow's hierarchy, but seeing how, once our base level needs are met, we ascend this, this hierarchy of needs. You get your food, your shelter, your belonging, your sense of esteem met, and you come up till, Maslow's original formulation was that self-actualization was at the top. Shortly before he died, he modified it so that transcendence was at the top, so that even being in service to something bigger than yourself, the end of life, as he proposed, was not just to be, to live the most hedonistic, self-indulgent, pleasurable lifestyle possible, and not even to live the most maybe enriching, meaningful life possible in terms of being self-actualized, but to go even beyond that and see what is greater than you, a community, a creator, life itself, something it can get a little zen or a little mystical there. And again, I don't think that we even can entertain those questions in a meaningful way if some of our lower level needs are met, if we're starving, or if we're in a conflict, like a literal conflict zone, or just in conflict with the people around us all the time. Those questions aren't something that we'll really answer and find a meaningful answer to that we can live, I think. And at the same time, I want to say that I think we sometimes engineer these catastrophes or these challenges in our life as a way of avoiding some of these questions. Now, that's a big claim, and I'll admit that's probably easier for someone like me, who I'm very fortunate to not have to work for a living by virtue of the work that my parents have done and so many other smart and dedicated people have done to be independently wealthy. I totally acknowledge I'm in a different place from which to ask that question. But at some level, I think we're all faced with the same questions of who am I? Why am I here? What do I want? Where am I going with this life? So again, we're all snow and we're all snowflakes. So, anyway, I'm really glad and I'm grateful that you're here, on this journey with me. If you've listened this far, I'm really grateful to you for listening. If you haven't listened to any of the interviews that I've done, with these thought leaders who are almost all authors. I've always loved reading. I've loved learning. I've loved ideas and people. So I love reading a book knowing that I get to interview the author. And in fact, my reading list now, I sort it by deceased authors and living authors. And in an interview with Greg McKeown, who wrote Essentialism, one thing he said that was a bit of a perspective shift for me was, he said, Bryan, think about the remaining time you have in life. Setting aside longevity science. And I'm really pulling for you, Ray Kurzweil and all the folks at Calico. Keep going. But, a normal human lifespan, how much time is likely left to read books? And I think when we did the math, saying even if it was a book a week, it's probably somewhere in the vicinity of 1,000 books left. And that put in perspective, a little bit about, choose carefully what you decide to devote your time and talents and energy to, and the books that you're going to read. But at any rate, if you listen, to some of these interviews, I really hope that you not only enjoy the interviews, but you take away something that you are able to use to help improve the quality of life for people around you as well. And if I haven't mentioned already, my intention is to do more of these solo podcasts as well. I would love to know your thoughts about it. If you have questions you would like me to explore, I will say I will answer them. It's not a definitive answer. It's my answer. And as the saying goes, all advice is autobiographical. But also, it might be useful for you to know, as a coach, I endeavor to abstain from giving advice, rather believing that instead you have, again, your own wisdom, your own answers inside you. But nevertheless, I'm grateful if you have topics that you think might be useful to explore on this show. So if you want to send those to me, please do. You can send those to Bryan@goodliving.com. Also, if you haven't subscribed to this show, I invite you to subscribe, rate it, leave a comment, share it with a friend. Maybe you'd be interested to head over to goodliving.com. That's a website for the School for Good Living. I invite you to sign up for my email list where I send podcast releases, invitations to events I host. Also, this weekly, I call it a 3-Point Thursday, which has, those 100 words I mentioned on how to live a good life, how to be a great coach, how to earn recognition and money. So if that's interesting to you, you can sign up for that at goodliving.com. And beyond that, I will just say something I've already said once recently, which is thank you. I'm really grateful you're here. And for wherever you are, whatever you're going through, whatever you're committed to, I hope, for whatever it's worth, my hope, that you experience that as perfect in some way. I love what Osho said, that life is not moving from imperfection to perfection. It is moving from perfection to perfection. And again, whether that's true, I have no idea. Whether I choose to live life believing that, that makes all the difference in the world. So anyway, I'm looking forward to being along on this journey we call life with you. So I'll talk to you again whenever it is. Oh, and if you want to sign up for one of my programs, how did I forget that? I have a 9-month online group coaching program I call Life's Best Practices. Again, it's designed to help you live a life of happiness, meaning, and contribution. Make the difference you were born to make, that kind of thing. Live a life that matters. And I also am doing coach training programs. So I have a 2.5-day in-person intensive that's designed to help you be a great coach and get paid. I'm offering it here in Salt Lake City. As I'm recording this, it's December of 2019. I plan to do a few of these throughout 2020. The next one is at the end of January. So if you're interested, again, you can find more details about that at goodliving.com. And then finally, if I can be of service in any way, or there's anything you'd like me to know, I invite you to contact me at Bryan@goodliving.com. Be well. Hope you're having a wonderful holiday season, and I will talk to you later, my friends. Until then, take care. Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life. Explore life's big questions. Create answers for yourself in community. Get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at Bryan@bryanmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.